What you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences. And I've always sort of found you would see things that you would not automatically have come across.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that emphasises leadership. I'm Johnathan White, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even the Prince of Wales. Now's the time for an interview, Your Highness. It can't be any worse than you-know-whos. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make Britain work. We discuss everything from Sadiq Khan trying to take Uber's operating licence away to the latest developments in liquid crystal display, and of course the innovation and success in the country that make it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Pickles, former Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Chairman of the Conservative Party, and of course current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we are joined by Jeremy Good, the Managing Director of Cryogenic Limited, specialising in the production of superconducting magnets and their applications in research, science and industry. With huge changes in the market in that time, since foundation in 1992, Cryogenic have become a hugely successful British exporter. Jeremy and I discuss the history of the firm, how they have built their model for success, and what their plans are for the future. Jeremy, welcome.
Yes, nice to see you, John.
Yes, well, thank you very much for joining us today, and I thought it'd be a good place to kick things off. I know it's been a few months since Cryogenic has been in. I think the listeners would love to know what you and the team have been up to since, keeping busy, no doubt.
Yes, as I say, more of the same. The business has expanded. We've strengthened our position in various markets, including China and the American market, which we've quite long struggled with, has suddenly come very good. So it's become a very important market for us. And we are making more progress with ultra-low temperatures and various different types of instruments for our market. So it has been a good year for us this last year.
Now, I know that, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail in a few moments, but I know that one of those obviously extraordinary things about the business, and for those that might not know, and the figures may well have changed, but you're a 95% export company. And around 3/4 of that going to outside of Europe. Much of the reason for that is that, of course, your equipment can be used economically all over the world. How have you successfully created that model, Jeremy?
Well, the cost of working at low temperatures has become higher, because in the review we refer to it going from £2.50 to £8 a litre for liquid helium, and it is now over £12.
Extraordinary increase.
Yes, and it's in fact quite difficult to get hold of helium, and there are restrictions on how much you can buy at any price. And so being able to operate without liquid helium is an even bigger advantage. So I think our business is doing very well because of that. And the interest in working at low temperatures and using the sort of technology we produce is still very strong worldwide. So the market is very strong. We've had about a 60% improvement in the number of orders we have this year. Superb.
And it's important to stress, I think, that before we get on to the United States, the Indian subcontinent and indeed the Far East are exceptionally important to the business, if that's right.
Yes, particularly the Far East. China, Japan, and India are very important markets to us. We do business in Singapore, Hong Kong, Australia as well, but they're smaller markets compared to the really big ones.
And part of the reason, presumably, is because they are very much still expanding economies, and especially when it comes to their universities and scientific research areas of the economy.
Yes, places like China are making huge efforts to have a research base comparable with Western countries. India has always had quite a strong research centre, but again, it was small, but well connected to the West over the last, 50-odd years, but now is being expanded a lot, so that's a very important market to us as well.
Now, and you've just brought up also, of course, Jeremy, America, a very different market, to say the least. I know that in the review, of course, one of your most exciting recent projects was the, I think, 25-foot long magnet built for the Oak Ridge Center in Tennessee.
Yes. That's now been running for about a year, and they seem very happy with it, which is good.
Yes.
There are other people looking for similar quite large projects, which we're discussing. These projects can take years from initial discussion to actually a contract and then to build it. It's very high. It's just one side to our business, luckily. But it is an interesting part of it because there are so few people who do it. Generally speaking, a market like America, they don't buy equipment from overseas unless they can't get it at home. The tendency to buy from the local supplier somewhere else within the US is high. But there are certain areas of technology which they don't really have, and that's where we come in.
So is there anything you could put your finger on, Jeremy, that has perhaps changed in the American market, or indeed what you've been doing this end, that has, as you put it earlier, sort of cracked that nut, as it was, the American market?
Yes, it's just there's nobody who directly competes with us in the States of our range of product, which, it is very specialized. So
yes.
It's not too surprising.
No, just so obviously the listeners know, the business now was founded near enough 30 years ago in 1992. The market, of course, has changed in extraordinary ways since, not least because of the differences and the price levels, and therefore the lack of or need of liquid helium. Apart from that, Jeremy, how would you say in those years the market really has shifted to where it was then?
Well, the big change is the issue about liquid helium, as you say. And also it's a question of convenience. Not only do you no longer dependent on liquid helium, you can have a system which you don't have to have any knowledge or previous experience of working with low temperature equipment. You can just, plug in the mains, switch it on, and it'll do the job for you. Whereas in the old days, you had to be a bit of an expert to transfer liquids. The other thing is that has made it much more accessible to different research groups because they don't have to have a low temperature lab. And that means that many more people are making use of this technology for their own research. And that's been one of the reasons why the market has expanded so much.
And let's hope it continues. And with that in mind, actually, Jeremy, what advancements have you noticed, both in the sector, of course, in Britain, but of course, more importantly, in your export markets? What have you noticed that you've been quite excited about that's been developing at the moment that might bode well for the future of the business in the market?
The big swing to working at much lower temperatures, mentioned in the article, We used to do everything at 4 degrees absolute, and there was a certain amount of work which went at 0.3 Kelvin and a bit lower. And 20 years ago, working below a tenth of a Kelvin was a rarity. Now it's not so rare, and people we have a lot more work with people who want to work at these ultra-low temperatures, particularly for these scanning, tunneling microscopes that allow you to look at a single atom and analyze a single atom, which is an extraordinary achievement. But you can only do this at low temperatures where the atom doesn't vibrate so much and where its properties are easily distinguishable. So that's a big area of expansion.
And I think something we'll certainly be keeping our eye on. But moving away perhaps from, it's certainly not all a picture of loveliness. I know there are challenges, certainly as a company, you face. What would you say are the medium-term problems you might be facing over the next couple of years or so?
The problems that we might be facing?
Yes.
Availability of materials is a current problem. And obviously the continued restriction on nicotine, but that doesn't affect us so much. As we move to using less and less, the complications of paperwork are quite extraordinary. Today, our bank wanted details of who our customers were. These are end-use customers. There's a lot of action basically to do, I think, with money laundering rather than anything else.
I see.
So the banks have become very touchy about transferring money, why you're transferring money, to whom the money is going, or when we receive money. We've had occasions when £100,000 has been paid into our bank, and we've asked the bank, where's the money? And the reply has been, how do we know this money isn't coming from some not kosher, some source that's illegal? And so we've had to produce documentary evidence about the invoices paid and the equipment we supplied, and that they really are bona fide people, in order to get the money transferred from the bank's account into our own.
You'll have to jump through your own.
That never used to happen a year or two ago. And it is becoming quite common now for the banks to be very restrictive and ask a lot of questions. And we're doing, the trade we have been doing for the last 20 plus years. So it is rather extraordinary.
An interesting development. And I should perhaps also, Jeremy, obviously we are talking in the midst of a general election, and not probably a time as we approach Christmas would be wanting to do that, but we are. Now, naturally, this time of the electoral calendar, there are promises left, right, and centre from the parties on what might be done. I know that, interestingly, we speak, just so everyone knows, the day after the launch of the Conservative manifesto, which did promise little things, an increase in the R&D tax credit rate from 12 to 13%. But what would you like to be seen done, especially on the research front, that would make it easier for yourselves and indeed the wider economy to invest in areas like that?
Well, I suppose the concern is that, assuming we leave on the European Union on time, that this doesn't adversely affect the amount of money spent on research, and the government will make up that which would have otherwise come from Europe. I think hopefully trading arrangements will, not cause undue problems. We've certainly investigated all that with our suppliers and our shipping agents, and everybody seems to be prepared. But of course, we've actually got to step over the line to make sure that really is true. But we don't have too many worries on that front. But we'd quite like to see Brexit done, to use the expression, simply because we will have a more certain trading arrangement in the future.
And isn't that the word? And you can be really in almost any possible sector, but if you're exporting like you do, Jeremy, it's that word certainty that's required more than anything else.
Yes, certainly, and that applies not just to Europe, but to the rest of the world. Are we going to, be able to trade without restrictions of the sort I mentioned before? All this, some of the equipment we supply, being very high technology equipment, there are restrictions because of alternative use or military use or something. Most of it, from my point of view, is a very remote chance. But nevertheless, the powers that be do ask a lot of questions, and sometimes we are not given a license. That applies particularly in China at the moment. There are some areas that you have to be quite careful about.
Indeed, it'll be something exceptionally important to watch going forward, especially in the next, I suppose, 2 weeks until we find out what might happen. Now, in terms of, and another key, I think, a situation for you, Jeremy, is that, of course, that almost half, and correct me if those figures are out of date now, but almost half of your workforce is from outside of the UK, and most of them are from outside of the EU. Yes. Now, it's become increasingly difficult, I think, for so many different companies to ensure permits for them. And one can assume that, Jeremy, you'd be very keen that if we do leave the EU on time and this new Australian point-style immigration system is introduced, it could potentially be quite beneficial for the firm in ensuring the right visas are obtained on time.
Yes, I mean, it's a complicated system. It's quite expensive as it currently is. And as you say, it is quite restrictive. If there's no longer free movement to Europe, perhaps the pressure will be reduced. It will be easier to bring people in from all parts of the world on an equal footing. We do continue to hire people abroad. We have, as you say, more than half the staff here were born overseas. We have the reverse of that. We have 2 British people working in the Far East permanently. And the ability to carry on business depends upon the ability to both hire people to work here and for us to go and do work overseas in an efficient and timely manner. That is very important to us.
And looking at domestically for a moment, and you've, I'm sure what you're saying, Jeremy, you've been doing this for a while. Where would you place current British graduates coming out of school and university, the rest of it? Are we producing enough people with the right skill sets, or is there a dearth at the moment?
You have to be a bit careful who you hire. That's probably true of any business.
Sure.
But some of the schools of physics are definitely better than others. But you can get very good people. You just have to look carefully. We do get people who've been educated. We just had somebody who was educated in India but is living here, so there's no problem about work permits in this case. And generally speaking, we don't have too much difficulty hiring good people.
Good. Well, that's marvellous to hear. And I'm conscious of the fact of the time here, Jeremy, but I might just ask perhaps to finish the company's clearly had an exceptionally busy past 12 months and a very successful one too. It's an exciting time for yourselves there. What are the plans for the next 12 months going forward?
Well, we're acquiring more working space. We're investing in more equipment. We'll be investing quite a lot this year compared to last year. Tends to go a bit in cycles. You do an investment program and then you sit on it for 2 or 3 years to see how it works out before you do anything else too important. We continue to develop new products, which hopefully will secure our future in 5 or 10 years' time. We always have to be looking ahead because it's a research market, and so the questions that research is going to be addressing in 5 years is clearly not the ones they're asking now, because hopefully they'll have found the answers to the one they're looking now. So it'll be new questions and new techniques that are required. So we work hard to do that.
And who knows what research or scientific breakthrough that could have next month, and the whole market could be changed yet again, hopefully for the better.
Yes.
And
things, like these things, they are changing all the time, but and people say things have changed faster. I'm not convinced of that. I think the rate of progress is steady, but even when very new things come up and become highly fashionable to work in, the fundamentals of research remain the same. And one just has to follow the new trend and hopefully have the right equipment available.
And in fact, maybe just to really will finish now, Jeremy, but you've been in the business for a superb amount of time and have made a great success of it. What's been your guiding principle, especially when it comes to that research element that has ensured that success?
We tend to make equipment for people to their requirements, and that may be very innovative equipment, which we tend to try to do on a fixed price contract, and even though it has new elements. What we have not done very much of is designing something ourselves that's novel and then trying to go out and sell it. So we follow the market rather than creating new ones. And that has worked for us. It's rare in our case for us to come up with an idea that the market doesn't know about and doesn't know it wants, and then try to persuade them that they do want it. Although moving to working without liquid helium was something we did long before it became clear that that was an essential thing to do. And so we did lead the market in that.
And it has worked wonders. Essentially, it was to do. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope we can speak again very soon.
Thank you.
I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Jeremy, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at Cryogenic are continuing to raise standards. It does rather make me wish I'd paid attention in physics classes a bit more at school. But if you haven't heard it before, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, Eric Pickles. Lord Pickles served as Secretary of State for Communications and Local Government in David Cameron's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2018. Lord Pickles remains active as the United Kingdom's anti-corruption champion and the country's special envoy for post-Holocaust issues, as well as being a keen vexillologist. That's flags to you and me. I hope you will enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed speaking to Eric. Here it is now. Eric, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Now, I'm sure you won't mind me reminding the listeners that you've been involved in politics, both local and national, for quite a number of decades. Indeed, before the days we were in the common market. Given your experience over those years, what thoughts have you had over the last few weeks and months about the current political situation the country finds itself in?
Situation is quite dire because we have a parliament that is by and large useless. It's like a bored teenager on a long drive, and it knows what it doesn't want, and it's so bored with Brexit, but it can't agree. So no matter what you put up, it's against it. Are you in favour of a referendum? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of remaining within the single market? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of... No, I don't want to do that. No. And are you in favour of leaving without a deal? No, we don't want to do that. So it's against everything, but there isn't enough votes to be in favour of something. And it could be by the time this podcast goes out that Boris has started on the process of the bill, because we'll be voting on that today. But even then, what people don't seem to understand, this is not the end of Brexit.
Right.
This is barely opening the door of Brexit. We've got years of negotiations about trade agreements, relationships with Europe, putting down pieces of legislation. We get our agriculture, our fisheries, our financial services into place. Brexit is going to go on and on and on and on. I'm sure we are.
Now, the question is, I should actually remind listeners that we are talking on the day that the second reading of the European Withdrawal Act will take place. So, as we speak, we don't quite know. As, well, perhaps like the government front bench, don't know what's going to happen. You compare Parliament to a petulant teenager. What do you do to a petulant teenager to sort it out? Is there a chance that it will see sense and push this through this bill without making amendments? Is there a chance it will vote for its own for a general election? How do you see this playing out at the moment?
The sensible thing will be to put this deal through, because I've always been of the view a deal is better than no deal, because this is just the beginning. In order to start the process of Brexit, start the process of the United Kingdom taking over powers that it's not really exercised for 40-odd years, the smart thing is to get this thing through now. But in a way, it's not about Brexit itself. If there was a free vote, this deal would have gone through. Mrs May's deal would have gone through. But it's about politics. It's about a Labour Party that thinks it has a chance, trying to make the Prime Minister, whether it was Theresa May or Boris Johnson, look as though that they are in office but not in power, of delaying it as long as possible. There's a lot of talk about an election in the autumn, maybe back end of November, beginning of December, something for us to look forward to before Christmas. It's beginning to look less likely. It's beginning to look as though they might want to drag it into spring to get as far away as possible from the rather decisive moment that Boris came back with a deal. We have to remind ourselves that nobody thought he could deliver a deal, and it has quite shocked them. And if you remember, all this process went through in order to ensure that we were left without a deal. When we have a deal, suddenly, oh no, it's not that kind of deal. We don't want that kind of deal. We want something different.
I think the vast majority of people in this country, whether Remain or Leave, now would be very satisfied for this to come to a amiable conclusion. And as correctly just said, because when it does come to those in the opposition with claims want this to end, and then introduce wrecking amendments, they introduce new objections to it, the general public are getting quite frustrated.
But you've got to understand that quite a lot of people don't get beyond a small area within Westminster, sometimes a cliche referred to as the Westminster bubble, and go back to their own patch. Now, by and large, everybody hates their MP, except when they're at home, doing the fairs, wandering around, helping people. So they, in a way, they're cosseted to that great, which I feel is coming as a tsunami of change.
You, of course, MP for Brentwood for
25 years.
Absolutely. What would you? I mean, of course, you resident there as well, despite being a proud Yorkshireman, obviously representing a good Essex seat. What would you say to your old constituents right now? Hang in there, it'll be all right.
Well, it's different when you're a member of Parliament because, you've got to kind of toe the government line a little bit. So one thing I found now is I've got my weekend back and I say what I want. And I think I always say to our constituents is that it is pretty hopeless down there.
Excellent. Well, on that, I think, honest assessment, it's something I think the Parliamentary Review has always done quite well, talking frankly about problems, issues, and also not just good practice, but leadership. Well, I was used to read it when I was a member of Parliament, because, what you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences, and I've always sort of found it quite a kind of a chatty magazine, but also you would see things that you would not automatically have come across. I certainly have attended the receptions over the year, and it's amazing the things you kind of pick up. And I think it's important to stress it's not because politicians are uninterested, because honestly, as you all know more than anyone, it's an issue of time. And to be able to have a channel and a platform where you can keep communication lines between businesses, schools and policymakers is so exceptionally important.
I think so, and it's important that it's beholden to nobody. People, pay to be part of the publication, pay for to be members, and it's a way of not being beholden to government, not beholden to anything.
Now, echoing the words, of course, your fellow chairman, Lord Blunkett, has said, what some might not know is that you started your political journey perhaps even further left than David Blunkett.
Oh, absolutely, I was a communist.
Now, what was it?
At the age of 14, I was bought the Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, and I read it from cover to cover. I tried to read it a few years back, and I just couldn't follow anything.
Oh, so I was going to say perhaps you might know the minds of the show front bench better than they do themselves.
From my position when I first joined, I would regard them as recalcitrant running dogs of the capitalist system.
Now, what was it then that moved you from radical Marxists to running the only inner-city council controlled by the Conservatives in the 80s?
Well, I was very young, and I was fascinated by what was happening in what was then Czechoslovakia and Dubček, and the revolution that was taking place there inside communism, and the way in which he was repressed by Mr. Brezhnev, and the tanks and taking over. I was so angry. And I'm 16, remember. I'm really angry. I thought, what's the most outrageous thing I can do? I'll join the Conservative Party as a protest. And I kind of sticked around. My family thought it was the funniest thing that ever happened to it. I was Eric the Tory. And
well, I think you announced this quite grandly as a grand protest.
I did indeed. But, I kept going down, and it was an exciting time. People were developing the ideas of what the Conservative Party should be. Selsdon man, even Heath looked radical. We had different ideas, and it eventually clicked. And at some point, I became a Conservative, and that was 51 years ago. I think I'm definitely 100% a Tory now.
Through and through.
Through and through.
Although I do know the story, most people might guess that a dynamo Conservative like yourself would have perhaps a portrait of Mr. Thatcher or Mr. Churchill in their office. But who is it that you have?
I'd Che Guevara. Which I always had him over my left shoulder for visitors, and they always used to you see their eyes going up and thinking, that can't possibly be it. Someone asked me if it was Desi Arnaz. I thought it was married to Lucille Ball. But no, the reason I did that was to remind me and to remind my officials that without constant vigilance, the cigar-chomping commies would take over.
I'm sure David Blunkett was in the room to reply to that, actually. But in that long journey, you eventually ended up, of course, in 2010, doing something most Conservatives never thought they would have to do, but in a coalition government with, of all people, the Liberal Democrats.
That's right.
Now, for something I think perhaps today more than ever, people and our politics seems to be almost wholly determined on how we voted in a referendum 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the most normal thing would happen after something like that would be the country would come together, and if anything, we're more divided. I mean, I thought working in the coalition, I'm proud to have been part of that coalition. I'm proud to have worked alongside the Liberal Democrats, who I think realised that, like all minority partners in a coalition, they would suffer at the polls.
Do you think we've lost the ability recently as a people to work with those that we might disagree with on issues more than we used to?
I'm not sure that's right. I mean, you can see various members of the Conservative Party working closely with Liberal Democrats and Labour to defeat their own government, but it's not a thing I think I would want to encourage.
Quite. And I should remind listeners, we are recording this in Victoria, just over the road, Cardinal Place, a fantastically new development site, which wouldn't have been there without some of your legislation. What was the proudest?
I personally approved it.
Absolutely. What was the proudest moment, do you think, in serving Secretary for 5 years?
It's my actual proudest moment. We did a thing called Troubled Families, which was the first centre-right attempt to deal with poverty and to deal with difficult families that were causing a disproportionately large amount of call upon the state, and it was on the basis of tough love. It's on the basis of getting people into jobs. It's about dealing with the kind of the family as a whole, not just one or two individuals that were having a problem. And I'm pleased that it's continued.
And since, I should very much stress, since of course you're stepped down being an MP, you do have your weekends back, but that's not to say you haven't remained very active and very busy. Of course, continues the government's anti-corruption champion, shone the harsh light of day over malpractice in the local government. Indeed, the Queen's speech we've just had includes some of your recommendations from 2016. I think a couple of things on that. First of all, are you surprised, I may imagine you may not be, at some of the backlash towards, in this country, introducing voter ID for voting?
It is absurd, and it's particularly absurd coming from the Labour Party, because it was largely Labour's vulnerability that got my interest in trying to do something about it. And it's a bit like saying, you're requiring people to show some ID, that this is suppressing voting. It's a bit like saying that the post office is suppressing parcels because they demand to see some ID. I think they've got a bee into their bonnet that this is something like that goes in the state to repress. It's not. It's about giving confidence to the system. Now, the Electoral Commission and foreign observers have warned us for such a long time that our electoral system is vulnerable. And it's to misquote John Major, we are really sort of old maids cycling to evensong and war-beam. Yeah, I mean, it's such a basic thing. It's an important thing. And it was kind of interesting in some of the trials. They did a focus group with a bunch of young Asian girls. And they said they thought the process of a photo ID would actually give them a greater confidence in the fairness of the system. I make all kinds of recommendations to stop postal vote harvesting, to stop various fraud taking place, to stop intimidation at counts, to stop intimidation outside polling stations.
And I think you referenced it earlier, the Westminster bubble. A lot of the places where this occurs and the places where this does go on are places where perhaps many members, many people in the press don't usually go to.
No, they don't. We saw a YouGov poll that said the overwhelming majority, well in the 60%, thought this idea was sensible.
Yeah, and I imagine you're quite proud that recommendation is in the speech.
Yes, I mean, I'm a bit frustrated they didn't do it sooner, but nevertheless, I'm very happy that they are doing it.
It's as if the government's time has been taken up by something else and we've not focused on anything domestic.
Absolutely.
But with a man, though, with his roots in local government, do you think, and how much you've worked with that report, especially looking at them carefully, how would you rate our current state of local municipal politics?
Local government's very good. I mean, local government, don't get me wrong, it's by and large corruption-free, and it does a remarkably good job. And it was, in truth, my worries about local government and that these measures were brought in. I don't believe the fraud is big enough to be able to take a parliamentary seat, but it is big enough to take a council. And if you are negligent, uncaring about the probity of the poll, you're likely to be equally negligent about the awarding of contracts to your friends. So it's all past that. But local government is a very enduring part of our constitution. I got a bit of stick because we had to take some money from them, but by and large, they survive very well.
Excellent. Now, beyond obviously that work, you also, of course, the British envoy for post-Holocaust issues.
Yeah, sure.
Very dear to your heart. I know you've done some fantastic work recently, including with obviously former Shadow Chancellor from the Review, Ed Balls. Would you mind, if you could just let listeners know what projects you are working with and really the importance that has to so many communities around the country? Well,
I used to be very unpleasant about Ed Ball, and he used to be very unpleasant about me. But I found working with him remarkably easy, and we've not had a single row in 2 years, and by now we're beginning to be able to finish each other's sentences. We're building a memorial to the Holocaust next to Parliament with a learning centre below it, and the reason why the Prime Minister chose that site is that it was David Cameron, and he wanted to ensure that when people left the memorial, they would look and see Parliament and recognise that it was the last bastion against tyranny. But more important, to remind people who work in Parliament that the legislature has a choice. It can either protect its citizens or it can oppress its citizens. And we do know that that it was a compliant legislature that brought in the Nuremberg laws. And at a time when there are parts of Europe that are seeking to rewrite their history and seeking to see themselves as only the victims of the Nazis, I'm determined that we should tell the truth in an unblinking way. We are, I suppose, at a critical crossroads when the last survivor is likely to be no longer with us within the next decade and a half. And at that point, we do know that history starts to be reassessed. I think it was Simon Sharma that talked about this. And he was referring to the French Revolution. And of course, most of the books written in the 1850s are the ones that have shaped our view of the French Revolution. But the difference is this, that slightly over 100 years ago, my grandfather Edgar grabbed hold of his Lee Enfield and walked out of a trench in the Somme and walked towards the Germans. And within a few minutes, most of the people he'd been brought up with, most of his friends were dead. Nobody doubts that he did that. But there's a whole industry out there that doubts that the Holocaust took place. So that's why it's important that we help frame that narrative.
And you reference as well, it's so important, especially at this time of history, so many years afterwards, that young people in schools get the correct education about it. How do we compare as a country in doing that compared to some of our European friends?
We I think, compare remarkably well, and particularly because we've got a mixture of things. We ensure through the lessons of Auschwitz that 2 pupils from every secondary school go to Auschwitz each year, that they have a preliminary meeting, a visit and a wrap-up. We ensure that Holocaust Day is remembered in January. Now, I can remember starting that. Or I'm not starting it, but being part of a foot soldier of people that put it together. And, it was like one man and a dog, but now it's quite a massive, it's a massive event. So I think we are quite good at remembering that. I think where we perhaps do need to have a wider understanding is beyond the death camps. And we need to kind of understand the Einsatzgruppen, which was the roving murder squads, how important they were. You were more likely to have been shot in a ditch than to end up in a death camp. The hinterland of that is Lithuania, where I was last week talking to colleagues, and through Belarus and the Ukraine. And it's really important that we ensure that we register where those death sites are.
And I think certainly, and I'm going to sit down next to speak, which hopefully won't be too long away. It's something I think we'd be very happy to keep updates on how that project is going, because it's so important and people do need to be aware of it. Looking to the future, though, I imagine you were actually very content and happy. The former Prime Minister, friend and colleague David Cameron just released his book, and you came quite unscathed from it.
I came out, he was very nice about it. I even bought the audio version because he was reading it, and he obviously, but there was a fair bit of affection, and I'm rather glad they left out one or two of the other embarrassing things.
Maybe not this time.
Yeah.
But it's important, I think, and I'm conscious of the time, but I think it's important that today people have become so perhaps caught up in what's happening in this country regarding Brexit. Looking to the future, what would you say that it's a positive thing that this country has to look forward to?
Well, we're a large trading nation. We're a large economy. We're a liberal democracy, and it would be good to get through Brexit over the coming years. And it would be good to start to look at some of the social issues that we need to tackle, those that have been left behind by our economic progress. And it would be good to see some solid investment in this country, both in terms of its infrastructure, but also in terms of the way it operates as a democracy.
And I know that's going to be a huge focus of the next review. Pickles, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you've all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm off to the Clarence to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube and Spotify. The views expressed by each guest in the podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry or any other guest on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.